I was sitting in my recliner going through old mail when my phone rang. It was a number I didn't recognize, but I picked up anyway. That's the kind of man I've become since my wife passed. I answer everything now because I spent too many years letting calls go to voicemail, and I've learned that silence costs more than you think. Mr. Harlan, the voice said. This is Pete, the electrician. I'm out at your property. Your late wife's studio, the one on Birchwood. I'd forgotten he was going out there that morning. My wife, Diane, had a small art studio about 12 minutes from our house, a converted garage she'd rented for nearly 15 years. She passed 14 months ago. Ovarian cancer, they said. Caught too late, they said. I'd been meaning to clear out the space for almost a year, but kept putting it off. Finally, a friend told me the wiring was probably shot. The building was old, and that I should get someone to check it before I started moving things out. Yeah, Pete, I said. Everything okay out there? He paused. Not a long pause, just long enough. Mr. Harlan, I think you should come out here, and this might sound strange, but I'd rather you came alone. I don't want to say more on the phone. I remember looking at the window. Outside, my son Marcus was mowing the back lawn. He'd been staying with me on and off for the past few months, helping around the house, he said. Being there for me, he said. I'll be there in 15 minutes, I told Pete. I didn't tell Marcus where I was going. I grabbed my keys, walked through the kitchen, and told him I needed to run an errand. He waved without looking up. The drive to Birchwood felt longer than 12 minutes. My mind kept circling the same question. What could an electrician possibly find in my wife's art studio that would make him ask me to come alone? When I pulled up, Pete was standing outside the side door. He's a young guy, maybe 35, with a quiet, serious face. He shook my hand and then looked past me at the empty street. You came alone, he said. I did. What's going on, Pete? He led me inside. The studio smelled the way it always had, linseed oil, old wood, a faint trace of the lavender candles Diane burned while she painted. Her easel was still standing in the corner. I hadn't touched anything. Pete pointed to the far wall, where he'd removed a section of drywall to get to the junction box. I wasn't snooping, he said quickly. I had to open this section because the wiring behind it was completely corroded. But when I pulled the panel back, I found this, tucked between the insulation and the inner wall, wrapped in a plastic Ziploc bag, and then again in a small canvas pouch, was a USB drive, a folded letter, and a small spiral notebook. My hands were shaking when I picked them up. The letter on top had my name on it in Diane's handwriting. Norman, it began. If you're reading this, then something happened to me and I didn't get the chance to tell you in person. I need you to read every word of this before you talk to anyone. Especially Marcus. Diane and I had been married for 31 years. We met in our late 20s, both working in the same mid-sized accounting firm in Columbus, Ohio. She quit after our son was born to focus on painting, something she'd loved since childhood, but never had the time to pursue. Marcus was our only child. He was 34 now, divorced once, currently between jobs in some vague consulting capacity that I'd never fully understood. I sat down on the small stool Diane kept near her supply cabinet, and I read. She wrote that it started about 2 years before she got sick. She'd noticed small withdrawals from our joint savings, never more than $400 at a time, never frequent enough to trigger an alert. At first she thought it was me, maybe cash I'd taken out and forgotten to mention. But when she checked with me and I had no memory of any of it, she started looking more carefully. Over 18 months, nearly $22,000 had been moved out of our savings in small increments. She had traced it. It took her a long time, and she didn't tell me because she was afraid of what I would do. What she found was that the withdrawals correlated with times Marcus had access to our home. He knew where we kept our banking information. He borrowed my laptop multiple times over the years. She believed he'd been making transfers using an online portal I'd set up years ago and rarely checked. But that wasn't the worst part. Diane wrote that when she confronted Marcus privately, without me, because she wanted to protect me, he didn't deny it. He told her it was a loan, that he'd pay it back, that if she told me, it would destroy our relationship with him. He cried. He begged. She gave him 3 months to begin paying it back. He never paid back a single dollar. Instead, 2 months after that conversation, Diane started feeling tired, then nauseous, then she had back pain that wouldn't go away. By the time the doctors found the cancer, it had already spread. She wrote, "I don't know if these things are connected, Norman. I want to believe my son is not capable of what my mind keeps going to, but I need you to know what I found, because I will not be there to protect you." There was more. She'd kept a log in the spiral notebook, dates, amounts, transfer records she'd printed and photographed. She'd also put something on the USB drive. She wrote that it contained a recording she'd made of her conversation with Marcus. She had used her phone, placed on the shelf behind the coffee maker in the kitchen. I sat in that studio for 40 minutes before I could stand up. I did not go home right away. I drove to a diner I used to go to before Diane got sick, a place called Merle's on Route 9, and I sat in a corner booth and ordered coffee I didn't drink. I read the notebook 3 times. Every page was in her careful, small handwriting. Dates going back to October 2 years before she died. Account numbers, transaction codes, and at the back of the notebook, a page titled "What Marcus Told Me," which was a word-for-word account of their kitchen conversation, written out from memory the same night it happened. She had written, "He said the money was for a business opportunity he couldn't tell me about yet. He said he'd been embarrassed to ask outright. He said he planned to pay us back triple once things came through. He smiled when he said that. That particular smile of his. And I knew in that moment that none of it was true. I knew that smile. I'd seen it since he was a teenager. It was the smile Marcus used when he wanted you to stop asking questions. I drove to my friend Dale's house. Dale is a retired county sheriff, my age, somebody I've known for close to 25 years. I showed him everything. He listened without interrupting, which is one of the things I've always valued about Dale. When I finished, he was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Norm, you need to listen to that recording before you do anything else. And you need to do it here." Dale has a laptop. We plugged in the USB drive. Diane's voice came through the speakers, slightly muffled but clear enough. I heard Marcus's voice too, and what I heard was almost exactly what she'd written in the notebook, except for one part she hadn't included in her notes. Near the end of the conversation, after the crying and the promising, Marcus said something that stopped me cold. He said, "And I will remember this word for word until the day I die. Mom, you're going to make yourself sick over this. You need to let it go. Stress like this is what gives people cancer." He said it gently, like a warning wrapped in concern. Diane's voice stayed steady when she answered him. She said, "I hope you're right, that it's nothing, Marcus. I genuinely hope that." That was the last exchange on the recording. Dale looked at me for a long moment. "What do you want to do?" he said. "I want to know if my son is just a thief," I said, "or if he's something worse." Dale had a friend in the county health department, a woman who had worked for years in pharmaceutical oversight before retiring. Her name was Grace, and she agreed to meet us that same evening. I brought copies of Diane's medical records, which I'd kept in a binder at home, and I brought the notebook. Grace was thorough. She asked careful questions about Diane's symptoms in sequence, when each one started, how quickly things progressed. She looked at the treatment timeline and the original diagnosis. After about an hour, she said, "I can't tell you what caused her cancer. Nobody can tell you that. What I can tell you is that the progression you're describing is atypical for someone her age and health history. She was a non-smoker, active, no family history, and the speed from first symptom to stage 3 is on the faster end." She paused. "There are substances, not all of them illegal, some available without a prescription, that can accelerate cellular degradation in certain tissue types when introduced gradually over time. I'm not making an accusation. I'm telling you, it is not outside the realm of possibility." She looked at me steadily. "I think you should talk to someone who handles these cases." I didn't sleep that night. Marcus called me the next morning, his usual easy check-in. How was I doing? Did I need anything from the store? He'd been so attentive since Diane died, so present, so eager to be helpful around the house. I had thought for 14 months that it was grief, that he was processing the loss of his mother by channeling it into action, the way some people do. I told him I was fine. My voice was steady. I was surprised by how steady it was. After I hung up, I called a private investigator that Dale recommended, a woman named Beverly who had worked in financial crimes for the FBI for 2 decades before going independent. I met with her the following afternoon and laid out everything. She asked to keep the notebook and the USB drive for 72 hours. When I met with Beverly again 3 days later, she had a folder on the table in front of her. "The financial picture is clear," she said. "The transfers your wife documented match an account in your son's name that he opened under a variation of his middle name. Technically legal to open, but the pattern of deposits makes the source obvious once you know where to look." She slid the folder toward me. Over the full period, we're looking closer to $31,000. I nodded. I'd half expected a larger number. "There's something else," Beverly said. She opened the second page. "Marcus has a friend, has had one since college, a man named Derek, who runs a small pharmaceutical supply business out of Indiana. Nothing illegal on the surface, but they've been in frequent contact going back almost 3 years." She looked at me. Derek's business sells, among other things, industrial quantities of compounds that in smaller, consistent doses can act as a slow-acting toxin. "I'm not in a position to tell you what happened to your wife, but I flagged this for a colleague of mine who works with the county medical examiner's office, and she'd like to speak with you." I sat in that office for a long moment. Outside, through the window, I could hear traffic and someone's radio. "My son," I said. Not a question, just those 2 words. "Mr. Harlan," Beverly said quietly, "I know how hard this is. But your wife wanted you to know. That's why she left what she left." What happened over the following weeks is not easy to describe. The medical examiner's office opened a review of Diane's death record. Beverly's contact cross-referenced Derek's company's supply logs with the timeline. Marcus, unaware of any of this, continued calling me every few days. I kept our conversations short but normal. It was the hardest acting of my life. During this period, I went back to Diane's studio twice. I sat in there with the door closed, among her paintings and her brushes, and the particular quality of light that came through the north-facing window she'd specifically asked for when she signed the lease. She had painted a series of landscapes in her last 2 years, rolling fields, bare winter trees, wide gray skies. I had always thought they were beautiful in a melancholy way. Now I looked at them differently. She had painted them while she was watching her savings disappear, while she was sitting with a secret she couldn't bring herself to tell me. I found myself talking to her in that room. I don't know if I believe in anything after death, but I told her I was sorry I hadn't noticed. I told her she should have been able to tell me. I told her I was going to finish what she started. The moment everything broke open came about 6 weeks after I found the studio cash. Marcus called me on a Tuesday and asked if he could come over for dinner. He'd done this regularly. Cooking for me was one of his gestures of caring since the funeral. I had always looked forward to it. This time I said yes, but told him I'd been feeling a little off and not to bother bringing anything elaborate. I then called Beverly. She had been waiting for an opportunity like this. She told me what to do. When Marcus arrived, I was sitting at the kitchen table. I had a small digital recorder running in the drawer to my right, fully legal in Ohio under single-party consent. Beverly had confirmed this. Marcus made pasta, the same recipe Diane had taught him when he was 12. While we ate, I let the conversation settle into familiar rhythms. Then I told him I'd been going through some old financial records and found some discrepancies in our joint account from a couple of years back. I kept my voice casual, curious, not accusatory. He set down his fork. "What kind of discrepancies?" he said. "Transfers I don't remember making. Small ones, spread out over time. You know how it is when you get older. You start second-guessing your own memory." I watched him very carefully. That smile. Just for a fraction of a second. Then it was gone, replaced by concern. "Dad, you probably just forgot. Or maybe Mom moved some money around for supplies for the studio. She never told you everything she spent on that place." "Maybe," I said. I took a slow sip of water. There was one transfer that went to an account I didn't recognize, under a name I didn't know. The silence stretched between us. The refrigerator hummed. "I don't know what you're talking about," Marcus said. His voice had changed, just slightly, but I heard it. "It's funny," I said. "The name on the account was your middle name. Raymond, isn't it? Marcus Raymond Harlan." He stood up from the table. "Dad, sit down, Marcus." I don't know where that voice came from. It was not the voice I'd used with him in 34 years of fatherhood. It was something older and flatter. He sat down. What followed was not a confession so much as a collapse. He started with denials, moved through justifications, the business deal, the temporary loan, the intent to repay, and then somewhere in the middle of it, when I didn't react the way he expected, when I didn't soften or argue back, he started to cry, the same way Diane had described in her notebook. The same mechanics. I let him finish. Then I said, "I know about Derek." The crying stopped. "I know what Derek's company sells," I said. "And I know how long the two of you have been talking. And I know that the county medical examiner is currently reviewing how your mother died." He went very still. "I want you to know," I said, "that your mother left me everything I needed. She was smarter than either of us, and she was braver than I've been about all of this. She protected me even after she was gone." I stood up, walked to the counter, and called Dale, who was parked 2 houses down. Beverly was with him. The investigation took 4 more months. I won't give a courtroom summary. That's not the story I'm trying to tell. What I will say is this. The toxicology review found evidence consistent with long-term exposure to a compound that Derek's company had sold to Marcus in quantities far exceeding any personal use explanation. Marcus was charged. Derek was charged. The financial fraud counts were almost secondary by the time everything was laid out. Marcus called me once from a holding facility, about a week after he was taken in. He wanted to explain. I listened for about 30 seconds and then I said, "Your mother already explained everything. I don't need your version." I hung up, and I didn't feel the way I expected to feel. I thought I would feel satisfaction or closure or the righteous clarity that people talk about. Instead, I just felt the weight of what Diane had carried alone for 2 years while she was dying. The weight of knowing she'd spent her last months protecting a man who had already decided she was expendable. I felt that weight, and I think I'll feel it for the rest of my life. I kept the studio. I renewed the lease. I go there sometimes on Sunday mornings, and I sit in the light from that north-facing window, and I look at her paintings. I've started learning about art, about the techniques she used, the particular quality of her later landscapes. There's a local instructor who teaches a small class on Tuesday evenings, and I've been going for about 2 months now. I am not good. Diane would have laughed at my attempts. Kindly. I found a second letter in the back of the notebook, written on a separate page with no heading, just her handwriting in the familiar, small, careful lines. "You were always the steady one, Norman. The one who showed up. Don't let any of this change that." I try to hold on to that. Some days are easier than others. The USB drive, the notebook, the canvas pouch. I keep them in the studio now, on the shelf above her old easel. I don't know exactly why. I think it's because that's where she chose to hide them. That's where she decided to trust the house with her truth, and the house held it until the right person came along. An electrician named Pete, who had the good sense to make a phone call instead of pretend he hadn't seen anything. I've thought about that choice a lot. A man doing a simple job, opening a wall, finding something that had nothing to do with him, and deciding anyway that it mattered. I went back and tipped him $300 in cash. He tried to refuse it. I told him Diane would have insisted. He took it. I've had a lot of time to think about what Diane did, not what was done to her, what she chose to do with the time she had left. She could have told me. There were 100 moments when she could have sat me down at the kitchen table and said, "Norman, I need to show you something." And part of me, the part that still gets angry at 3 in the morning, wishes she had. I would have fought for her harder. I would have known what I was watching for. But she didn't tell me, and I've had to make peace with the reason why. She knew me. She knew that if I found out what Marcus had done, I would have broken apart in a way that couldn't be repaired. She bought herself time, and she bought me protection. And she paid for both with silence. That was her intelligence working on my behalf, even as everything else was being taken from her. I don't call that weakness. I call that one of the most precise acts of love I've ever witnessed. What I've come to understand, slowly, the way you understand things that cost you something, is that dishonesty has a weight to it. Marcus carried $31,000 of theft and 2 years of deception and whatever he arranged with Derek, and the weight of all that doesn't disappear when you think you've gotten away with it. It accumulates. It changes how you move through rooms, how you answer simple questions, how you look at the people you've deceived. I saw it in him during that dinner, in the fraction of a second before he controlled his face. He'd been carrying something heavy for a long time, and the effort of holding it up had cost him something I don't think he even noticed losing. That's the thing about integrity. Not as a moral lecture, just as a practical fact of living. When you stop being honest, you have to use energy that was meant for something else. You have to maintain the fiction, patch the inconsistencies, remember what you told to whom. Marcus spent years doing that maintenance work, and in the end it didn't protect him. It just made the collapse more total. I think about Pete a lot, the electrician. He opened a wall, found something that had nothing to do with him, and made a decision in about 30 seconds to do the harder thing. He could have put the drywall back. Nobody would have known, but he didn't. And because of that, Diane's 2 years of careful, quiet courage meant something. That's what I mean when I say integrity isn't abstract. It's a series of small decisions made when nobody is watching, by people who aren't being graded on it. Pete wasn't trying to be a hero. He just decided that what he'd found mattered more than his convenience. I'm 63 years old and I'm learning to paint on Tuesday evenings. I'm not good at it, but I go and I try, and I sit in Diane's studio on Sunday mornings in the light she specifically chose, and I think about what she left behind, not the notebook and the USB drive. Those serve their purpose. I mean the paintings, the way she kept making things that were beautiful while she was in the middle of something terrible. That, to me, is the definition of resilience, not refusing to feel the weight, not pretending it isn't there, carrying it anyway and still making something worth looking at. I don't know what the rest of my life looks like. I know I'll carry this, the loss of her, the knowledge of what happened, the particular grief of losing a child who is still alive but is no longer someone I recognize. That last part is its own kind of mourning, and I won't pretend it isn't. But Diane left me a letter that ended with, "You were always the steady one, Norman. The one who showed up. Don't let any of this change that. I'm trying. Some days I manage it better than others. But I show up. I keep showing up." I think that's all she was ever really asking.